The morning I decided to stop correcting her, I was standing in the hallway outside my own bedroom door, hand raised to knock. Not open. Knock. On a door that had been mine for 31 years. I stood there long enough to hear her laugh at something on her phone inside, and then I walked back to the kitchen, filled the kettle, and sat down at the table that had once been the center of this family's life, the one where my children had done homework, where my husband Edward had read the newspaper every Sunday, where I had signed every paper that ever mattered in this house. I sat at that table like a guest, and I said nothing. Not yet. My name is Constance Vera Aldridge. I am 68 years old, and for 31 years I lived in this house the way women of my generation were taught to live, fully, quietly, without complaint. I raised 2 sons in these rooms. I buried a husband from this front porch. I tended this garden through 7 different varieties of rose and 2 kinds of grief, and one season where the only thing I could manage was to keep the rosemary alive. The house is mine. The deed says Constance Vera Aldridge. The water bill says Constance Vera Aldridge. The insurance policy, the property tax records, the mortgage that Edward and I paid off in full in 1998, all of it says Constance Vera Aldridge. But you would not know that by watching how Renata moved through it. She had arrived in our family 4 years ago on the arm of my younger son, Marcus, wearing a smile like a curtain and a certainty that was immediately uncomfortable to be near. Marcus was 32 at the time, nervous and besotted, the kind of man who mistakes a woman's confidence for strength. Renata was confident, I will give her that. Confident the way certain people are confident when they have never been told no. The wedding was lovely. I paid for most of it, which I was glad to do. Marcus was happy. That was what mattered. In the beginning, she came to the house on Sundays for dinner. She helped clear the plates. She called me Mama Constance, which I did not ask for but accepted graciously. She asked questions about the garden, about Edward, about family recipes she claimed she wanted to learn. It was the performance of a person who had decided to be charming and was good at the decision. I noticed even then how her eyes moved through rooms she visited. Not admiringly, assessingly, the way an appraiser looks at furniture. I told myself I was being uncharitable, that I was one of those difficult mothers-in-law who find fault where none exists. Edward had told me once, laughing over his coffee, that I had the sharpest eyes of anyone he'd ever known. I didn't always take that as the compliment, he meant it. So I watched and I said nothing and I served dinner. My older son, Franklin, lives in Toronto. He is steadier than Marcus, more careful, the kind of man who reads every line of a document before signing. His wife, Paula, is a woman I genuinely love, not from obligation but from years of evidence. She sends birthday cards written in actual ink. She calls me on Tuesdays just to talk. She once drove 6 hours to sit with me when I had a health scare, asked no one for credit, and drove 6 hours home. Franklin knew about Renata. He said very little. Franklin is not a man who speaks against people he cannot prove wrong, but I noticed he was always polite to her in the careful way you are polite to someone you are choosing not to trust. The shift began 18 months after the wedding. It was gradual, the way these things always are. The way water erodes, not dramatically, not all at once, but by returning again and again to the same place until the stone gives way. Renata and Marcus had been renting an apartment on the other side of the city. The lease was ending. The neighborhood had become, Renata explained at Sunday dinner, difficult. She said this the way some people say things, with a tone that expects agreement and doesn't really leave room for questions. They needed to find somewhere. I had a 3-bedroom house and lived in it alone. The conversation happened the way conversations like this always happen, sideways in the margins of other conversations, until suddenly it was the main conversation and you couldn't quite remember how you'd arrived there. Marcus said it first gently over the phone. Just temporarily. Just until they found something they liked. The rental market was impossible. He would help with the utilities, of course. He would. I said yes because he was my son and the house was large and I had raised these boys to come home when they needed to. Insert. If this story is already finding its way under your skin, hit that like button and subscribe to Linda's Life Diaries. And drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. She always said the ones who stay quiet longest know the most. Let's see if that's true. They moved in on a Saturday in March. Marcus carried boxes with his sleeves rolled up, looking young and grateful in a way that reminded me of him at 8 years old. Renata directed the placement of furniture with an efficiency I recognized as a personality trait being deployed as performance. She was showing me something, how capable she was, how organized, how clearly she had thought about all of this. What she had thought about, I would come to understand, was the house. The guest bedroom became their room. I had prepared it carefully, fresh linens, the good soap, room made in the closet. I had moved some of my own things from the second bathroom to make space. Small accommodations. I made them without being asked because that is what I was taught, that is what you do when your son comes home. The first month was ordinary. The second month was the beginning of something else. It started in the kitchen. There is a particular kind of conversation that doesn't sound like an argument. It sounds like preferences. I find it works better when the knives are stored this way. We've been keeping the coffee here, it's a little closer to the outlet. I hope you don't mind, I rearranged the pantry, it flows better now. I did not mind the pantry. I minded what the pantry was a symptom of. The kitchen had been mine for 31 years. Not in a possessive way. In the way that a place becomes part of you when you have spent 3 decades in it, learning its particular light in the mornings, the way the third burner runs hot, the drawer that sticks unless you lift it slightly on the way out. I knew this kitchen the way you know a person you have loved a long time, with the comfortable fluency of total familiarity. Renata rearranged it in the way someone arranges a space they believe they have the right to arrange. I moved the knives back once. They moved again within a week. I said nothing. The dining room was next. She asked, and I give her credit for asking, whether the table might be turned a different direction. The light was better for eating, she said. I thought about Edward sitting at the head of that table for 28 years, facing the window that looked out into the garden he planted. I thought about the particular angle of afternoon sun that came through in October, which he always said was the best light in the house. I said the table was fine where it was. It was turned 2 weeks later, while I was at my friend Gloria's house for the afternoon. When I came home and saw it, I stood in the doorway for a moment. I didn't say anything. I walked into the kitchen, made a cup of tea, and went to sit in the garden. I was not yet decided. I was still, at that point, telling myself the story of the difficult mother-in-law with the sharpest eyes in the room. But then came the bedroom. My bedroom, my room, is at the end of the hallway. It has been mine since Edward and I moved in. Since the year we were both 37 and Marcus was 4 years old and Franklin was 7 and the world seemed full in a way that made your chest ache pleasantly. I have slept in that room through grief and through joy and through 31 years of ordinary life. Edward's reading glasses are still in the drawer of his nightstand. I have not moved them. I do not intend to. There is a good lock on the door. Edward put it in himself years ago, after one too many small boys burst through without knocking at inopportune moments. It is a simple lock. A thumb turn on the inside, nothing complicated. One evening in October, I came home from my book club later than usual. The house was quiet, which I assumed meant Renata and Marcus had gone to bed. I walked down the hallway toward my room, reached for the handle, and found that the door would not open. I tried again. Locked. I stood there for a moment with my hand on a handle that did not turn, outside a room that was mine, and something very clear and very cold moved through me. A lock on the inside means the person inside has locked it. But I was outside. I went to the kitchen. I did not knock, I did not call out. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and I sat at the kitchen table in the quiet house and I thought very carefully about what it meant that my bedroom door had been locked from the outside. It means someone stood in the hallway, reached through the crack of the open door, and turned the thumb latch from the outside. It means someone wanted the room inaccessible. In the morning the door was open. The room looked as it always looked. Nothing was obviously disturbed. But the closet, my closet, where I keep winter things on the upper shelf and the files from Edward's business dealings on the lower, the files were not quite as I had left them. Someone had looked through them carefully and replaced them almost perfectly. Almost. I stood in my closet for a long time looking at the files. Then I closed the closet, went to the bathroom, washed my face, and went to make breakfast. I said absolutely nothing. The thing about being 70 years old, or close to it, which I am, is that people make an error about your silence. They hear it as acceptance. They interpret it as the natural quietude of someone who is slowing down, getting tired, becoming easier to manage. They mistake stillness for passivity. It is one of the great miscalculations people make about women of my age. My silence was not acceptance. My silence was arithmetic. I was adding things up. The kitchen, the dining table, the door, the files. There was something specific about the files that concerned me, because Edward's business files are not sentimental keepsakes. They are documents. Property documents, investment records, a copy of the partnership agreement Edward held with his business partner before the business was sold. These are documents that contain information, account numbers, property descriptions, the kind of detail that would be meaningful to someone who was specifically looking for it. I thought about why Renata would want that information. And then I thought about the house. The deed is in my name alone. Edward and I made that decision deliberately and for reasons that had nothing to do with distrust of our children. It was simply a legal efficiency that our solicitor recommended at the time. The house passes to me fully and without condition. Whatever happens to it from here is my decision alone. Renata did not know the exact legal status of the house. She knew Marcus's name was not on the deed. He had mentioned once casually that the house was in Mum's name, but he had never engaged further with what that meant, because Marcus is the kind of man who finds financial specifics uninteresting and trusts that things will work themselves out. I suspected Renata was trying to understand what exactly in Mum's name meant in practical terms. I decided to let her wonder a while longer, and to pay much closer attention to everything. This required that I appear not to be paying attention. This is, if I am being honest, not difficult for me. I have spent 68 years being underestimated. I am a quiet woman who dresses conservatively and keeps her hair the same way she has kept it for 20 years, and does not require an audience to feel present in a room. People who do not know me find me easy to overlook. People who do know me are frequently startled by how much I have observed. Edward used to say, "The quietest person in the room is usually the one who's listening." He was right. He usually was. I called my friend Gloria that week. Gloria has been my closest friend for 40 years, since we were young mothers on the same street and our children played together, and we survived our respective husbands' work travel by meeting for tea on Tuesday afternoons and being honest with each other in the way that only true friends manage. Gloria is sharp, practical, and does not permit sentimentality to interfere with clear thinking. I did not tell her everything. I told her enough. "She's gone through your files," Gloria said, when I had finished the relevant portion. "It appears so. And you haven't said anything to Marcus." "Not yet." There was a pause, and then Gloria said the thing that I had been thinking but had not yet articulated. "You want to know what she's looking for before you tell her you know she's looking." "Yes." "That's very sensible," Gloria said. "That's what I would do." I also called my solicitor that week. His name is David Achebe, and he has handled my family's legal affairs for 15 years. He is discreet, thorough, and exactly the kind of person you want to call when you suspect that someone is quietly investigating the extent of your assets. I explained the situation to David without dramatics. He listened in the focused way that good lawyers listen, which is without interrupting and with a pen moving steadily across paper. "Do you want to understand your current position?" he said when I'd finished. "Or do you want to take action?" "I want to understand my position first," I said. "Then I'll decide about action." "All right," he said. "Let's talk." What I learned from that conversation was clarifying in several directions at once. The house was entirely mine. Not partially mine, not contingently mine, fully and without complication, under a deed that had never been amended or co-signed, and that would not change its character based on who was living in it or for how long. Renata and Marcus could live in my house for 50 years and acquire no legal stake in it. In England, this was not a matter of opinion or interpretation. It was a matter of law. The files in my closet, which Renata had apparently reviewed, would have told her that the house was bought in both Edward's and my names originally, that it transferred fully to me upon Edward's death, and that the current deed listed me as sole owner. It would also have shown her the investment accounts, 3 of them, which are held in my name and managed by a financial advisor named Helen who I have trusted for 12 years. The investment accounts are not, as one might assume from my lifestyle, modest. Edward and I lived carefully. We were not flashy people. We did not take expensive holidays or drive expensive cars or wear expensive things. We saved in the quiet, methodical way of people who grew up understanding that security is built slowly and is worth more than display. What we had saved, over 40 years of disciplined living, was substantial. I will not name a number. Numbers are not the point. The point is, Renata, going through my files, would have found evidence of a woman considerably more financially secure than she appeared to be. And that, I realized, was precisely the problem. Because a woman who is financially secure is a woman who does not need to be managed. A woman who does not need to be managed is a woman who cannot easily be maneuvered. And a woman who cannot easily be maneuvered, who owns the house she lives in and the accounts that fund her life and the decisions about both, is a woman who presents a problem to someone who has other plans. I did not know yet what Renata's plans were precisely, but I was beginning to understand the shape of them. I thought about this for 2 days, and then on the third day, a Wednesday, I received what I would later understand was the beginning of the answer. Marcus came to find me in the garden. I was deadheading the roses, late in the season for it, but there were still a few stragglers and it had been a warm autumn. He stood at the edge of the garden path in the way he has done since he was a teenager, with his hands in his pockets and the slightly apologetic posture of someone who is about to ask for something. "Mom," he said, "Renata and I have been talking." I set down my clippers. "Yes." "About the house." "Yes," I said again and waited. He looked at the ground for a moment. This is Marcus's tell. He looks at the ground when he's saying something that Renata has asked him to say but that he is not entirely comfortable saying. I have known him for 36 years. I know every one of his tells. "We were thinking," he said, "that it might make sense. For everyone. If the house was, if the paperwork was updated." "Updated how?" I asked. "To add Renata to the title." He said it quickly, the way you say a thing when you know it might not land well. "Just for security. For her. If something happened to you, it would make things simpler." I looked at him for a moment. "My son. My boy who was once 4 years old and called the garden his green outdoor room because he had not yet learned the word garden. Does Renata know what is currently on the title?" I asked. A small hesitation. "We've talked about it a bit. And she understands that the house is mine entirely." "Yes. And she would like that to change." Marcus's jaw tightened very slightly. He is not skilled at deception. He never was. She just thinks it would be fair. Given that we're contributing to the household. I picked up my clippers again. "I'll think about it," I said. I said it in the way I say things I have already thought about and decided. Marcus, who has known me for 36 years, heard the tone beneath the words and did not press further. He went inside. I finished deadheading the roses and I thought. Here is what I understood by the time I set down my clippers that evening. Renata had been in my house for 8 months. In those 8 months she had rearranged the kitchen, moved the dining table, gone through the files in my closet, locked my bedroom door so she could search it uninterrupted, discovered the extent of the property and the investment accounts, and had now sent my son to ask me to add her name to the deed of a house she had lived in for 8 months. She had not been subtle exactly. She had been confident, which is a different thing. She had been confident in the assumption that I was what I appeared to be. A quiet older woman whose sharp edges had softened with age, who could be managed by a combination of small domestic gestures and the gentle authority of a younger, more forceful presence. She was wrong. But she did not know she was wrong. And that was mine to keep for a while longer. I called Franklin that evening after dinner, from the garden where I could not be heard from the house. "I need to tell you something," I said when he answered. Franklin listened the way Franklin always listens, completely without interrupting, processing as I spoke. I told him everything. The kitchen, the table, the files, the bedroom door, the conversation with Marcus this afternoon. When I finished, the silence lasted only a moment. "Mom," he said very quietly, "how long have you known?" "Known precisely?" "Since the bedroom." "Suspected?" "Since the pantry." Another pause. "And you haven't said anything to anyone?" "I'm saying something now." "Right." I heard him exhale. "What do you want to do?" "I want to make sure everything is properly protected," I said. "Legally. And then I want to wait." "Wait for what?" I looked out across the garden in the dark, at the shapes of the roses I'd been tending all afternoon. I want to wait, I said, until there's no question. Until it's entirely clear what she's been doing and why. I don't want to act on suspicion. I want to act on certainty. And then, I said, I'll make one phone call. Franklin said. Paula and I can come down this weekend. Not yet. Not yet, love. Mum. Trust me, I said. I know what I'm doing. There was a pause. And then my son, who knows me well, said, I know you do. I thanked him and rang off and sat a while longer in the garden in the dark, with the smell of the roses and the cold coming in from the east, thinking about the particular patience required of someone who has decided not to move until they are entirely sure of their footing. Edward used to say that the best decisions are the ones you make slowly and execute quickly. I was still in the slow part, but not for much longer. In the weeks that followed, I watched. I watched the way you watch when you have decided not to be watched, watching with half an eye, with peripheral attention, with the accumulated skill of a woman who has been dismissed enough times to understand exactly how much you can see when people believe you are not looking. Renata was bolder now. The conversation about the deed had happened. She didn't know what I had made of it, but she had introduced the topic and it had not resulted in a confrontation. That I suspect she took as a good sign. She had tested the ground and it had held. Small things accelerated. She began referring to the house in a particular way. Our home, she would say on the phone to friends in a voice just loud enough. When we've had the kitchen updated. When we sort out the spare room. Future tense. Possessive. Not Mama Constance's house but our home, with the casual authority of someone who has already decided something and is waiting for the paperwork to catch up. I noted this. I said nothing. She had a friend around for coffee on a Thursday afternoon. A woman named Simone who I had met once briefly and found aggressive in the way that certain women are aggressive when they are performing for each other. I was in the garden and they were in the sitting room with the windows cracked. I was not eavesdropping. I was tending the rosemary. The sitting room window was open. It's a beautiful house, Simone was saying. What does she think she's going to do with it? That's what we're working on, Renata said. It's just about getting the right structure in place. And she's agreeable? A pause. Renata seemed to search for a word. She's not difficult. She's old-fashioned. She doesn't really understand how these things work. I snipped a stem of rosemary and set it in my basket. She understands more than she lets on, Simone said. She said it lightly like a joke and they both laughed. I went inside and put the kettle on. I was thinking about structure. The right structure in place. I knew what that meant. She needed, at minimum, to be on the deed. Ideally, and here is where it became more complicated, she would want to be on the deed in a way that guaranteed her a portion if the property were ever sold, and possibly in a way that protected her position if Marcus and I were to have a falling out, or if I were to become incapacitated. She was, in other words, planning ahead. Comprehensively. She was not thinking about tomorrow. She was thinking about 10 years from now, about what position she wanted to hold when certain events, my increasing age, my eventual death, the probable reduction of my ability to manage my own affairs, made the question of the house a pressing one. She had decided to be in a position of strength when that moment arrived. What she had not calculated was that I had already spent my entire adult life making sure I would be in that position first. That same week I met with David again. We talked for 2 hours. When I left his office, certain things had been done, not dramatically, not in ways that would be visible or detectable, but done. Quietly, legally, in the way that solid things are done. The investments, already in my name, now had formal beneficiary designations that had not previously been documented with the same precision. The will, which had been straightforward but perhaps not explicit enough about specific items, was clarified. The house deed, which was already solely mine, was reviewed, and a specific clause was added to make clear that occupation by family members created no legal claim to ownership, a clause that David confirmed was both common and enforceable. I was not, as some people might think, preparing for battle. I was simply making certain that there was no ambiguity, that every door was properly locked, from the inside by the person who owned the house. I went home and made dinner. Marcus came down the stairs while I was cooking and stood in the kitchen doorway the way he used to as a boy, drawn by the smell of something good. "That smells incredible, Mom." "It's your father's stew," I said. "Sit down." He sat down, and for an hour we had dinner together. The three of us, Renata at the other end of the table, pleasant and bright and entirely herself, and I asked about their week and listened to the answers and passed the bread, and nothing in my face or my voice or my manner gave away a single thing. Not yet. I was waiting for one more thing. I needed her to move, to make the actual move, not the probing conversational one. I needed the ask to be explicit, documented, and witnessed. Because I did not want to act on the basis of what she'd said to her friend through an open window, or what Marcus had murmured at the edge of the garden, or what I had inferred from files that had been almost carefully replaced. I wanted the record to be clear. And she was close. I could feel it. The momentum she had been building, the rearrangements, the research, the confident references to our home. These things don't happen without an endpoint in mind. She was building toward a moment. She was patient, I'll credit her that, but she was not infinitely patient. She was going to move. And when she did, I would be entirely ready. The moment arrived on a Tuesday in November. I know it was a Tuesday because I had been to Gloria's in the afternoon and come home to find a letter on the kitchen table, printed on official-looking paper, from a solicitor's office I didn't recognize, addressed to me. I did not open it immediately. I set it on the table, made tea and sat down. Then I opened it. It was a letter from a property solicitor named Gerald Watts, acting on behalf of Marcus and Renata Aldridge, requesting a meeting to discuss an amendment to the property arrangements at the above address, and providing several dates for my convenience. I read it twice. Then I set it down, picked up my phone and called David. "The letter has arrived," I said. "Good," said David. "Now we move. If this story has found you, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story from Linda's Life Diaries. The best ones are still coming. And the people who watch to the end are exactly the ones who need to hear them. The appointment I made was not with Gerald Watts. I wrote back by hand on proper stationery, which I have used for correspondence my entire adult life and which I was not about to stop using now, and said that I appreciated the letter and would be happy to meet, and proposed a date. The date I proposed was a Friday 2 weeks away because 2 weeks was what I needed. In those 2 weeks I did the following things. First, I called Franklin and Paula and asked them to come down the weekend before the meeting. This time I did not say not yet. I said come. They came on a Saturday morning with a car full of overnight bags and the particular purposeful energy of people who know they are there for a reason. Franklin and I sat in the garden while Paula took Marcus for a walk, an arrangement we made quietly, because Marcus was what he had always been, the son who needed to be held separate from what was coming. Not because I was angry with him, because he was not the architect of this. I told Franklin everything, this time in full. The complete accounting from the day they moved into the letter on the kitchen table. He listened without interrupting, his face still and careful in the way that reminded me, powerfully, of his father. When I finished, there was a long silence. "She went through your room," he said. Not a question. "Yes. While you were at Gloria's." "I believe so." He looked at the garden. "And you've been sitting on this." "I've been making sure," I said. "There's a difference." He looked at me then, and I saw something in his face that I recognized, the expression Edward used to wear when he realized I had been 3 steps ahead of him, and found it simultaneously impressive and slightly unsettling. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "I need you to be here," I said. "For the meeting." "Not at the meeting, I'll go to that alone. But here afterwards." "All right. And I need you to know the full picture so that when it's time, there's nothing that surprises you." "There isn't," he said. "Is there anything else?" I looked at the roses. Nearly bare now, in November, the thorny structure of them showing through. Edward had always said they looked more honest in winter, that the roses were the decoration but the thorns were the truth of the thing. "One more thing," I said. "I need you to know that whatever happens next, I am not doing this from anger. I'm doing it because this house is everything your father and I built, and I will not allow it to be taken by someone who moved into it 8 months ago and locked my bedroom door from the outside. Franklin's jaw tightened. He nodded. Good, he said. Right. We went inside and had lunch. Understanding for Friday of the meeting, I dressed carefully. Not overdressed. I am not a woman who performs through clothing, but deliberately. A dark blue wool jacket that had been Edward's favorite on me. Good shoes. My hair exactly as it always is. I drove myself to the address in the letter, which turned out to be a small but credentialed solicitor's office in the town center. Gerald Watts was a man in his early 50s with the careful neutral expression of someone trained to appear without allegiances. He stood when I came in and offered his hand, and I took it and we sat down. Mrs. Aldridge, he said. Thank you for coming. Of course. I understand you've had a chance to review our letter. He folded his hands on the desk. My clients, your son Marcus and his wife Renata, have asked me to open a conversation about the title to the property. Yes, I said. I read the letter. He proceeded to explain, in the measured language of a professional being careful, what Marcus and Renata were proposing. The proposal was as I had expected. They wanted to be added to the deed as joint owners. The rationale offered was that they were contributing to the household costs and had, in effect, made their home in the property. There was an implication, not stated directly but present, that this would simplify matters in the event of my incapacity or death. He was good at his job. He made it sound reasonable. When he finished, I opened my handbag and took out a document. I set it on the desk and slid it toward him. This, I said, is a letter from my own solicitor, David Achebe of Achebe and Partners, confirming the current legal status of the property at the address in question. Gerald Watts looked at the document. His expression did not change, but something in the set of his mouth shifted very slightly. The property is solely in my name, I continued. It transferred to me in full upon my husband's death. The deed has never been co-signed or amended. The occupation of the property by Marcus and Renata creates no legal claim to ownership under English law, as confirmed by Mr. Achebe, and as your own professional training will certainly confirm. Watts nodded carefully. I have also taken the precaution, I said, of clarifying my will, my investment arrangements, and the beneficiary designations on all relevant accounts. Everything is in order. Everything is clear. Mrs. Aldridge, I would also like you to know, I said, that I am aware of why this proposal has been made at this time. I am aware that the property has been investigated. I am aware that the relevant documents have been reviewed. I paused. I am not angry. I am simply precise. He was quiet for a moment. My clients believed. I know what they believed, I said, not unkindly. They believed I was an older woman who might be persuaded, or who might not fully understand the implications of what was being proposed. They were mistaken in this. I picked up my handbag. You may advise Marcus and Renata that the house will remain exactly as it is. The property is not going to be amended. If they wish to continue to live in it under the existing arrangement, which is to be clear that they are guests in my home, they are welcome to do so. If they would prefer to find their own accommodation, I will of course support Marcus in that transition. I stood up. You may also advise them, I said, that if anything else in my home is accessed, moved, or disturbed without my permission, I will take that as an indication that the current arrangement has become untenable. I held out my hand. Gerald Watts, to his credit, shook it. Good afternoon, I said, and I walked out into the November afternoon and drove home. I drove home slowly, not because I was shaken, because I wanted to think before I arrived, and thinking requires a certain quality of stillness that you can only find sometimes in motion. The roads in November are quiet at that hour, for in the afternoon the light already going soft and low the way it does in autumn, the kind of light that makes everything look considered. I had said what I needed to say. I had said it without raising my voice, without trembling, without the particular performance of dignity that women sometimes feel compelled to stage when they are in fact frightened. I had not been frightened. I had been clear. There is a difference between the confidence of someone who is acting and the confidence of someone who simply knows. I knew. I had known for weeks with increasing precision exactly what the situation was and exactly what my position in it was. The meeting with Gerald Watts had not been a confrontation. It had been a correction. The record had been set straight, politely, in a room with good carpet and a professional witness. Now I needed to go home. Franklin's car was in the drive when I arrived. Paula had made tea, I could smell it from the hallway, and the kitchen had that particular quality of careful busyness that people produce when they are waiting for news and don't want to appear to be waiting for news. Franklin stood up when I came in. I set my bag on the counter, took off my jacket, and sat down at the kitchen table. "Well," he said. "It's done," I said. Paula set a cup in front of me without being asked, the way she always does, the way that has always made me love her. Franklin sat back down. Neither of them spoke, and I drank my tea for a moment in the quiet. Then I told them what had happened. Not at length. I am not a woman who requires an audience for the dramatic retelling. I told them simply what I had said, what Watts had said, how it had ended. Franklin was quiet for a long moment after I finished. "Where are they now?" he said. "Marcus is at work." "Renata?" I paused. "I don't know. She may be out. She may be upstairs." Franklin nodded slowly. Paula put her hand over mine on the table for a moment, briefly, and then removed it. She knew better than to make it into something it didn't need to be. "What happens now?" Franklin asked. "We wait," I said. "Gerald Watts will contact them. They will know by this evening what was said. And then," I looked at my tea, "then we will see who Marcus is when it matters." This is the part one had not allowed myself to examine too carefully, because it required a kind of honesty about my son that was not comfortable. Marcus is a good man. I believe that. He is gentle and he is warm and he loves me, genuinely, in the way that sons love mothers when the love has not been complicated by circumstances. But he is also a man who loves his wife, and who has, over the course of 4 years, allowed that love to organize itself around her preferences. He had asked me about the deed because she had asked him to ask. He had allowed the kitchen to be rearranged because it was easier than the conversation that pushes back. He had not, as far as I could tell, been fully aware of the extent of what Renata had been doing. But not fully aware is not the same as innocent. It is simply a choice to look in a particular direction. I finished my tea. "I'm going to the garden," I said. "Come and find me when you're ready for dinner." Marcus came home at 6:30. I heard the front door, heard him call out, heard Paula answer from the kitchen in the easy voice of someone covering a silence. I was in the sitting room by then with a book I was not reading, and I listened to the particular rhythm of his movements through the house. The coat on the hook, the shoes, the kitchen, the brief exchange with Paula. Then his footsteps in the hallway. He stood in the sitting room doorway. I looked up. His face told me that Gerald Watts had already called. "Mom," he said. "Come in, love," I said. "Sit down." He came in but didn't sit. He stood in the middle of the room with his hands at his sides, and his face had the look it had always had when he was a boy who had done something wrong and knew it and didn't know how to begin. 20 years old or 36, the face doesn't change much for that particular feeling. "You went to see a solicitor," he said. "I did." "Without." He stopped himself. Started again. "You could have talked to me." "You talked to me," I said. "In September. At the edge of the garden. And I said I would think about it." "I know, but—" "Marcus." My voice was quiet. Not cold, I did not want cold, I wanted honest. "I have been thinking about it since before September. I have been watching what has been happening in this house for several months. I have been watching carefully because I wanted to be certain before I said anything. And now I am certain." He sat down then. In the armchair across from me, the one that had been Edward's, which nobody had claimed after Edward died and which nobody had ever quite sat in properly because it was still, in some way that the family understood without discussing it, his. "What do you mean you've been watching?" Marcus said. I told him. Not everything. I did not tell him about the files, not yet, because that conversation needed to happen with both of them present and I was not ready to have it without being fully prepared. But I told him about the bedroom, the door. The particular evening in October when I came home to find my own room locked from the outside. Marcus's face changed when I said that. Something moved across it that I recognized, not guilt exactly, but the specific expression of a person who has just been handed a piece of information that rearranges everything around it. She didn't, he started. I don't know precisely who or when, I said. I only know what I found. He was quiet for a long moment. Mom, I didn't know about any of that. I believe you, I said. And I did. Not entirely, not without the small reservation that honesty requires, but substantially genuinely I believed him. Marcus is not a duplicitous person. He is a person who has allowed himself to be organized by someone who is. I should have. He stopped again. Yes, I said simply. You should have. Not you should have known, not you should have stopped her, just yes. Because there had been enough opportunities for Marcus to notice what was happening, in smaller ways, the ways a person notices when they are paying attention. The kitchen, the table, the casual references to our home that he had certainly heard and apparently absorbed without questioning. He had not been paying attention. Or he had been paying attention and had found it easier to look away. I did not say any of this. He was saying it to himself, I could see it in his face, and that conversation, the one he was having internally, was more useful than anything I could add to it from the outside. Where's Renata? I asked. He looked at his hands. She went to Simone's when Watts called her. She's still there. I nodded. I had expected something like that. Renata was not, I suspected, a woman who handled surprises well. She had been operating on a plan, and the plan had just encountered significant resistance from an unexpected direction. She needed time to recalibrate. That was fine. I had time. Will you stay for dinner? I asked. He looked at me. Mom, Franklin and Paula are here. I'm making your father's stew. I picked up my book. Come and help me in an hour. He sat for another moment, and then he nodded slowly and went upstairs. For dinner was the four of us. Franklin, Paula, Marcus, and me. Renata did not come home until nearly 9, by which time we had eaten and cleared up and were sitting in the sitting room with the television on without watching it, and Marcus had drunk more wine than usual and was sitting with his elbows on his knees in the posture of a man carrying something heavy. I heard the key in the lock. The footsteps in the hall. A pause. She would have seen the coats, registered that Franklin and Paula were here, recalibrated in an instant the way she did everything. She came into the sitting room. She was beautifully put together as she always was. Renata at her worst is still immaculately presented, which I have always noted as the mark of someone who has understood from an early age that appearance is a form of armor. She stood in the doorway and looked at us, all four of us, and her expression was carefully composed. Franklin, she said. Paula, I didn't know you were coming. Spontaneous visit, Paula said pleasantly. Franklin nodded. Renata looked at me. I looked back at her. I did not smile exactly, but my face was not unkind. I had decided very deliberately on a particular register. Not hostile, not warm, not performatively neutral. Simply present. The look of a woman who is entirely comfortable in the room she is sitting in, which is her room in her house, and who has nothing to prove and nothing to hide. It unsettled her. I could see it. Marcus, can I talk to you? She said. We're all family, Franklin said mildly. Whatever you need to say. A flicker across her face, something tightening behind the composure. She looked at Marcus, who looked at the floor, and then she looked back at me. Mama Constance, she said, and her voice had found a register I hadn't heard before. Carefully reasonable, with an undertone of something that wanted to be grievance but was being held back. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Has there? I said. About what we were proposing. About the house. She moved further into the room, which told me she had decided not to retreat. She sat on the sofa, carefully, and folded her hands. We were simply trying to establish something secure. For all of us. Including you. That's kind, I said. It wasn't, she paused. Reset. We weren't trying to take anything from you. That's not what this was. I let the silence sit for a moment. In the quiet, the television murmured something nobody was listening to. "Renata," I said, "I want to show you something." I reached into the side table drawer. I had put it there before dinner deliberately, and took out a document. I set it on the coffee table and slid it toward her. It was not a legal document. It was a photograph. An old photograph, slightly faded, in the particular colors of the late 1980s. It showed two people, a man and a woman, both young, standing in front of a house. The man had his arm around the woman's shoulders and they were both squinting a little into the sun, and they were smiling the way people smile when they have just done something enormous and are still slightly disbelieving of their own lives. The house behind them was this house. Renata looked at the photograph. She said nothing. "Edward and I bought this house in 1992, I said. He was 37. I was 37. We had saved for 11 years. We had 2 boys, one of whom was already growing out of his shoes faster than we could replace them." I paused. We signed the paperwork on a Thursday afternoon, and then drove home and stood in the garden for 20 minutes just standing there. Because we had done it. After 11 years of being careful, of choosing the sensible thing over the easy thing, of saying no to things we wanted so we could say yes to this, we had done it. Renata was very still. "This house is not an asset to me," I said. "It is not a property on a balance sheet. It is 31 years of my life. It is where I raised my children and where I cared for my husband when he was ill, and where I sat on that porch the evening after his funeral because I didn't know where else to sit." I looked at her steadily. "I understand that you are a practical person. I am also a practical person, and I will tell you practically. This house will never have your name on it, not because I am hostile to you, but because it is mine in a way that has nothing to do with any proposal you could make, and everything to do with what it represents." The room was very quiet. Marcus was looking at the photograph. Franklin had his arms crossed, his face still, watching. Paula was looking at her hands. Renata's composure was holding, but only just. I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes, what to say, how to say it, which angle to try. "I think," she said carefully, "that you've misread the situation." "Tell me how," I said. A pause. "We wanted," she stopped. Started again. "I wanted to feel secure. In my own home." "This is not your home," I said. Not cruelly. Simply. "This is my home, and you are welcome in it, and those are different things." The word welcome landed the way I had intended it, not as an invitation but as a reminder. You are here because I have chosen to have you here. That can be reconsidered. She understood. I saw her understand. For the first time since she had walked into the room, Renata looked at Marcus. Really looked at him, the look that passes between people who have a private language and appeal for reinforcement, a request for backup. Marcus was still looking at the photograph on the coffee table. He did not look up. The house was different after that evening. Not immediately, not in ways you could describe to someone who wasn't living inside it. But different the way rooms are different when the understanding between the people in them has changed, a slight adjustment in the air pressure, a new quality of quiet. Renata was careful with me after that. Not warm. I did not expect warmth and I did not require it, but careful. The rearrangements stopped. She did not go into my room. She did not talk about our home anymore, not within my hearing. And if she did it elsewhere, I neither knew nor needed to know. Marcus was quieter than usual for a week. He was processing something. I could see it, working through it at the pace that men work through things they find difficult to look at directly. I left him to it. He would come when he was ready. He came on a Sunday morning, when Renata had gone to her yoga class and the house was quiet. I was in the kitchen making bread. A thing I do on Sunday mornings because Edward loved fresh bread and I have never managed to stop doing the things he loved. Marcus came downstairs in his old university sweatshirt and sat at the kitchen table. I gave him coffee. He wrapped his hands around it. "I called Watts," he said, "on Thursday, to ask him for the exact details of what happened in that meeting." I continued kneading the bread. "He was very precise," Marcus said, "about what you said." "I expect he was. He's a good solicitor." "You said," Marcus paused. You said you were aware that the property had been investigated, that the relevant documents had been reviewed. Yes. What did you mean by that? I set the bread aside to rest and wiped my hands on my apron. Then I sat down across from him. I told him about the files. I told him calmly, plainly, in the way I had told everything else, without embellishment, without the emotional weighting that would have made it harder for him to hear. I told him about the bedroom door locked from the outside, about coming home to find the files in the closet not quite as I had left them, about the specific nature of the documents that had been looked through and what information they contained. Marcus listened. His face went through several things while I spoke. I watched them come and go, surprise, and then something that was not quite denial but was adjacent to it, and then the harder reckoning that follows when you cannot quite talk yourself out of what you are hearing. When I finished, he didn't say anything for a long moment. She went through your files, he said finally. The same words Franklin had said. The same quiet tone. Yes. While you were at Gloria's. I believe so. He looked at the table, at his coffee cup, at his hands. I didn't know, he said. I know you didn't. But you think she... He stopped. I think she wanted specific information, I said. About the house. About the accounts. I think she wanted to understand exactly what she was working with before making any moves. Marcus looked up at me. His eyes were slightly bright, in the way men's eyes get when they are holding something in. And she found out, he said. She found out that the house is mine, and that the accounts are mine, and that I am, in practical terms, considerably more financially independent than I may appear. He nodded slowly. She thought you were. He seemed to search for the word. Old, I said simply. She thought I was old and manageable and unlikely to be paying close attention. He flinched. She wasn't entirely wrong about the old, I said, and allowed a small smile. But she was wrong about the rest. Marcus looked at me for a long moment. Mum, he said. I'm sorry. I reached across the table and put my hand over his briefly. I know, I said. I didn't, he exhaled. I didn't think. I should have asked more questions. When she started talking about the house, about the arrangement, I should have. You loved her, I said. And people who love people often accept their version of things without examining it closely enough. It's not a flaw exclusive to you. It doesn't make it right. No, I agreed. It doesn't. We sat quietly for a moment. Outside, the November garden was bare and gray, and somehow still beautiful in the way that bare things have their own beauty if you are willing to look at them honestly. What happens now? He asked. That depends on Renata, I said. And on you. He nodded. I need to know, I said gently but clearly, what you intend to do. Not immediately. Not today. But I need to know that you understand what has happened, and that you are not going to allow it to continue. No, he said immediately. No, I'm not. I nodded. I believed him. Marcus, when he has arrived at a position, is not a man who wavers. Good, I said. Then we'll see. I got up and went back to the bread. The conversation between Marcus and Renata happened 3 days later. I do not know exactly what was said. I was in the garden deliberately, because it was not my conversation to be present for. I know it was long. I know there were raised voices at one point, Renata's first and then Marcus's in a way I had never quite heard from him before. I know that at some point the front door opened and closed, and then opened again after 40 minutes, which meant someone had gone out and come back. I stayed in the garden until the house was quiet. When I came in, Marcus was in the kitchen making tea. He looked tired in the way people look when they have been honest in a conversation that required a great deal of them. She's upset, he said. I imagine so. She says, he stopped. Reconsidered. She has a version of this where she was genuinely trying to help. Where everything she did was about security, about the future, and I've not. He set the kettle down. I'm not sure I entirely believe that version. But I think she partly does. People are very good at the versions of themselves that are easier to live with, I said. Yes. He looked at the counter. She wants to stay. In the house. She says. Another pause. She says she loves this house. That she thinks of it as home. I said nothing. I told her, Marcus said, that it was your home, and that if we were going to stay in it, things needed to change. What things? He looked at me. All of it. How she's been treating you. He seemed to struggle with the word. The presumption. The way she's been behaving as if the house was already hers. And what did she say? She cried. He said it flatly, without judgment in either direction. And then she said she understood. And then she cried some more. I poured myself a cup of his tea. Do you believe her? Marcus was quiet for a moment. I believe she's frightened, he said finally. I think this is. He searched for the right framing. I think she grew up with less than she lets on. And I think the house represented something to her. Security. Something she'd never had. And I think she went about trying to secure it in completely the wrong way. Yes, I said. She did. That doesn't excuse it. No, doesn't. But it explains it. I drank my tea. Fear makes people reach for things they don't have the right to reach for. Marcus looked at me with an expression I recognized, the expression of a person who is reassessing something, finding it more complex than they initially understood. You're not angry with her, he said. Not quite a question. I'm not angry, I said carefully. But anger is not the most useful thing here. What's most useful is clarity. She knows where the lines are now. She knows I am not who she thought I was. What happens next depends on whether she is capable of living with that. And if she isn't, I set down my cup. Then you will have a decision to make, I said. And I trust you to make it. He nodded. Slowly, with the weight of someone who understands that the decision, if it comes to it, will be the hardest one he has faced. Under 3 weeks passed. They were strange weeks, weeks with a new quality in the house that took some getting used to. Not hostile. Not warm. Something in between, like the particular atmosphere of a room after a window has been opened on a cold day. Fresher than before, but requiring adjustment. Renata was different with me. Not transformed. I did not expect transformation, and I would not have trusted it if it had appeared. But different in specific, observable ways. She no longer moved through the house with the territorial ease of someone who has decided they own a space. She knocked before entering rooms. She asked before using things. She said your kitchen instead of the kitchen, which was small but not nothing. She was, I believe, genuinely frightened. Not of me exactly, of the version of the situation she now found herself in, where the ground had shifted without warning and the position she had been carefully building had turned out to be built on sand. That kind of fright produces a particular humility that may or may not be durable. I was watching to see which it would be. I was also watching something else. About 2 weeks into this new atmosphere, I noticed that Renata had started spending time in the garden. Not doing anything productive in it. She had no particular interest in gardening as far as I could tell. But sitting in it, on the bench near the roses in the afternoons, sometimes with her phone and sometimes without it, looking at the bare November garden with an expression I couldn't quite name. I left her to it for several days. And then one afternoon I went out with my pruning tools and my gloves, and I worked in the far end of the garden without acknowledging her. And after a while she said, without preamble, "What are those?" I looked up. She was nodding toward the roses. "Edward's roses," I said. "He planted them in 2003. There are 7 varieties. This one," I touched the bare cane nearest me. "This one is called Constance Spry. He chose it because of the name." A small silence. "He sounds like he was kind," she said. "He was the kindest man I ever knew," I said. "And also quite stubborn. And occasionally infuriating." I looked at the roses. "But kind, yes. Fundamentally." She was quiet for a moment. "My father wasn't kind," she said. She said it without self-pity, simply as a fact being stated. "He was the other thing." I continued working. I didn't say anything. "We grew up in a council flat," she said. 3 of us in one room. My mother worked 2 jobs. A pause. "She worked herself half to death so we wouldn't have what she'd had, and then," she stopped. I looked at her. She was still looking at the roses. Then, I said quietly, then she got sick. And everything she'd saved, she exhaled. It doesn't matter. It was a long time ago. It matters, I said. She looked at me then, actually looked without the performance of looking, without the calculation. Just looked. A young woman in a garden in November who had, for a moment, said something true. I wasn't trying to steal from you, she said. And I heard for the first time, something that was not a position or an argument but a genuine statement of intent, flawed and incomplete as it was. I was trying to make sure that if something happened I wouldn't. She looked at the ground. I couldn't go back to having nothing. I understand that, I said. But I went about it wrong. Yes, I said. You did. The garden was quiet. Somewhere over the back wall, a wood pigeon was making its sound. The bedroom door, I said. Not unkindly. She closed her eyes. I know, she said. That's the part one need you to understand, I said. Not the solicitors, not the deed, you can have solicitor conversations and they can be put right. But standing in the hallway of someone's home and locking the door to their room from the outside so you can search it. I paused. That's a different thing. That's not a practical decision that went wrong. That's a decision about what someone else is worth. She didn't say anything for a long moment. I know, she said again, and this time it was different, smaller and more real. I went back to my pruning. We stayed in the garden for another half hour, not speaking much, and when I went inside I did not feel triumphant or vindicated or relieved. I felt tired, in the honest way you feel tired after something has been done that needed to be done. Not good or bad. Just finished. Franklin came down again in December, just before Christmas. He and Paula and Marcus and Renata and I had dinner together on a Friday evening. The first dinner all five of us had sat through that didn't have an undercurrent of something unspoken running beneath it like a river under ice. It was not entirely easy. Renata was still careful with me, and I was still watching, and those are not the ingredients of a relaxed family evening. But it was honest. And honest is more valuable in the end than easy. After dinner, while Paula and Renata cleared up and Marcus fell asleep on the sofa in the way he has always done after a large meal, Franklin sat with me at the kitchen table over a glass of wine. How is it? He said. Better, I said. Provisional. But better. Do you believe her? About the reasons. I considered this. I believe the fear is real, I said. Whether the behavior it produced is forgivable is a separate question, and not one I fully answered. But you haven't asked them to leave. No. Franklin looked at his wine. Why not? I thought about the garden. About the roses in November. About a woman sitting on a bench with her phone face down, looking at bare canes with an expression I hadn't been able to name until she told me about her mother and the savings that had disappeared. Because Marcus loves her, I said. And because she is capable of better than what she showed me. And because I paused. Because your father would have asked them to stay. Franklin looked at me. He was very annoying about second chances, I said, and allowed a small smile. Franklin laughed. A real laugh, brief and warm, the first one of the evening. He would have said that the question is never whether someone made a mistake. The question is what they do next. And what is she doing next? We're finding out, I said. Franklin lifted his glass. To finding out, he said. I lifted mine. On a Tuesday in January, I did something I have been thinking about for several weeks. I asked Renata to come with me to the solicitor. Not to David, this was not a legal matter. I asked her to come with me to see a different professional. A financial advisor named Helen, who has managed my investments for 12 years. I asked her because there was something I wanted her to understand, and I had decided that understanding required showing rather than telling. She came. She was puzzled and a little wary, and she said very little in the car. Helen's office is pleasant and unfussy and smells faintly of good coffee. Helen herself is a woman of 50, who has the particular gift of making complex things feel navigable without making them feel simple. She greeted me warmly and Renata carefully, and we sat down. I had told Helen what I wanted to do. She explained for the better part of an hour the structure of what I had. The investments. The property. The arrangements that had been made. Not the numbers, those are private and I am a private person, but the structure. The way it was set up. Who it was set up for. And then I said, "Please explain the beneficiary designations." Helen explained them. Renata was very still while she listened. The accounts, the property, in the event of my death, everything passes to Franklin and Marcus equally, with a specific arrangement for a small annual sum set aside for grandchildren, should either of my sons produce them. Renata is not named. She will not have access to these things unless Marcus does, and what Marcus does with his share is Marcus's decision. But Helen also explained the living arrangement provisions, the clause in my will that states plainly that while I am alive the house remains mine and no occupant, however related, shall acquire any claim to it by virtue of residence. I had not asked Helen to explain this to punish Renata. I had asked her to explain it because I wanted the situation to be clear, completely and finally, in a setting where there was no ambiguity and no room for misreading. When Helen finished, Renata looked at me. "Why are you showing me this?" she said. Her voice was even, but I heard the depth behind it. "Because I want you to stop looking for something that isn't there," I said. "I want you to understand completely that what you were looking for in my files, what you were hoping to find, is arranged in a way that protects exactly the people it should protect. And that the right way to belong in this family is not through paperwork." She looked at me for a long moment. "What is the right way?" she said. And it was a genuine question, not rhetorical, not challenging. Genuine. "Through time," I said. "Through behavior. Through being the person my son deserves." She looked at her hands. We drove home mostly in silence. But when I parked in the drive and she moved to get out of the car, she paused. "Mama Constance," she said. She hadn't called me that in months. "Yes. I'm sorry about the room." She said it without looking at me. Looking at the house. Properly sorry. Not sorry because I got caught. Actually sorry. I looked at the house too. "I know," I said. We went inside. Spring came the way it always comes to this garden. Not all at once, not with any dramatic announcement, but incrementally, in the particular language of things that have been waiting patiently in the cold and know, without being told, when it is time. The rosemary came first. It always does. Then the early crocuses along the south-facing wall, purple and white, and one determined yellow one that appears every year in a slightly different spot, as if it has been thinking about its position all winter. Then the first green tips on Edward's roses, tentative, testing the color of something just deciding to exist. I was in the garden on a Saturday morning in March when I felt it properly for the first time. That particular shift in the air that is not warmth exactly but the memory of warmth, the suggestion that warmth is coming, and that the world which has been closed and gray and enduring is about to open again. I stood with my hands in my gloves and my face turned toward the pale sun, and I thought, we have come through. Not without cost. Not without the particular weariness that comes from a long season of watchfulness, of saying nothing and seeing everything, of carrying knowledge quietly and waiting for the right moment to put it down. That kind of patience costs something. I knew what I had spent, and I did not pretend otherwise to myself, but we had come through. The winter had done its work. Not dramatically, I want to be clear about that, because the temptation in telling a story like this is to make the resolution bigger than it was, to reach for the grand gesture when the truth of the thing was more ordinary and more real. There was no single moment when everything changed. There was a series of smaller moments, each one building on the last, each one requiring something from the people moving through them. Renata was in the garden with increasing frequency as January moved into February. She had started, tentatively and without announcing it, to ask me questions about the plants. Not in the performed way she had asked questions about the garden in the early months, the curiosity that was really data collection, the interest that was really reconnaissance. These were different questions. Smaller, more specific, with no clear strategic purpose. Why do you cut it there? What does this one smell like in summer? Is that a weed or something you planted? I answered them. Simply, without ceremony, the way you answer genuine questions from someone who is genuinely asking. She was not becoming a gardener. She had neither the patience nor the particular quietness that gardening requires. But she was becoming someone who sat in a garden without needing it to be anything other than what it was. That is its own small progress. Marcus watched this with the careful attention of a man who is hoping to believe something, and is waiting for the evidence to make it safe. He had changed too, in ways that were harder to name but were visible if you knew what you were looking at. He was present in the house in a way he hadn't been, actually present, not the pleasant but elsewhere quality he'd had when they first moved in. He cooked dinner twice a week now, his own dinners, from his father's recipes which I had written out for him years ago, and which he'd never previously used. He sat at the kitchen table with his coffee in the mornings and talked to me about things that had nothing to do with household logistics. His work, his memories, questions about his father that he had carried for years without quite asking. He asked one morning in February about the day Edward and I bought the house. I told him the full story, the 11 years of saving, the Thursday afternoon in the solicitor's office, the drive home, the 20 minutes standing in the garden. He listened the way children listen to stories that are also histories, not for information exactly, but for the texture of a life, the weight of it, the particular quality of a moment that mattered. When I finished, he was quiet for a bit. He never told me any of that, he said. He wasn't a man who told his own stories, I said. He preferred yours. Marcus smiled. It was a smile that had something of Edward in it, the particular warmth of a person who is genuinely pleased without needing to make a production of it. I think I do that too, he said. Yes, I said. You do. It's one of the things I've always loved about you. The call from Franklin came on a Wednesday evening in February. He rang later than usual, which told me something before he'd said a word. Paula and I have been talking, he said, when we'd done the preliminary conversation. About what? About whether I should come down more often. A pause. About whether the current situation, Marcus and Renata living in the house, is actually working. It's working better than it was, I said. But is it working for you, Mum? Not for everyone in general, for you specifically. I looked out the kitchen window at the winter garden in the dark. Ask me that again in spring, I said. I'll have a better answer. He was quiet for a moment. That sounds like a yes that needs more time. It sounds like someone who is being honest about where things are, I said. Which is not the same thing as a crisis requiring intervention. I'm not proposing an intervention. Good. Because I would manage one very badly. He laughed briefly. Paula says she'll come down at Easter regardless. Paula is always welcome, I said. She knows that. She also says, a pause, and I heard him deciding whether to say the thing. She says she thinks you're lonely. I sat with that for a moment. Paula is very perceptive, I said. She is. I am sometimes lonely, I said. I have been lonely since Edward died. In the particular way you are lonely when the person who understood you best is no longer there to understand you. That is not Marcus and Renata's fault, and it is not something their presence in the house cures. I paused. But they are here, and that is something. The house is not empty. That counts for something. Even when the situation is complicated. Does the situation feel less complicated now? Yes, I said. Genuinely. A pause. Do you trust her? He asked. I thought about the garden. About the questions that had changed quality. About the morning in the car outside Helen's office when Renata had said actually sorry with her eyes on the house, and the particular stillness of someone saying a true thing. I trust that she understands the situation clearly now, I said. Whether that understanding produces lasting change, that's a longer question. And you're willing to wait for the answer. I've waited for harder things, I said. He said good night, and I sat for a while in the kitchen with the lights on in the winter dark outside the windows, and I thought about what Paula had said, and I thought about loneliness, and I thought about how strange it is that you can be completely at peace with a decision you have made and still feel the weight of everything it cost you. The specific moment I am going to tell you about now happened on a Sunday in late March. I am telling you about it not because it was dramatic, it wasn't in the conventional sense. No raised voices. No revelation delivered in a room full of witnesses. No document signed or hand extended over a table. It was an ordinary Sunday morning in late March, and Renata was making bread. I came downstairs at 8:30 to find her in the kitchen in her dressing gown with flour on her hands, consulting a piece of paper propped against the bread beam. The piece of paper was the recipe I had written for Marcus years ago, the one for Edward's bread, the one I make on Sunday mornings, the one I had made every week since he died because I could not stop doing the things he loved. She looked up when I came in, and her expression was something I hadn't seen on her before, uncertain and younger than usual, and slightly worried in the way of someone who is not sure they had the right to begin a thing they have begun. I hope, she started. I found the recipe in the drawer. I thought, she stopped. I should have asked. I looked at the kitchen. The flour on the counter, the particular arrangement of bowl and cloth and bread tin that I have used every Sunday for 30 years. Did you follow the method? I said. I tried to. I might have. She gestured vaguely at the bowl. I think it might need longer. I came and looked at the dough. Pressed it lightly with my finger. Give it another 20 minutes, I said. The kitchen is cold this morning. She nodded. I made tea. We did not have a conversation exactly. We were in the same kitchen at the same hour doing the same thing, and we did not need to annotate it. She watched when I showed her how to test whether the proving was finished. She wrote something in the margin of the recipe, a note to herself I supposed about timing. When the bread came out it was good. Not as good as mine, it takes a long time to learn a bread, but genuinely good, with the right crust and the right smell and the quality of something made by hand by someone paying attention. Marcus came down and ate 2 slices without being asked and declared it excellent in the uncritical way of a man who loves his wife and was hungry. I had 1 slice. It's good, I said. The method is right. You'll get the timing with practice. Renata looked at me. Would you show me? She said. The next time you make it? I thought about Edward and about Sunday mornings, and about the way the things we love outlast us if we give them to the right people. Yes, I said. Next week. Brewster came. Franklin and Paula arrived on Good Friday with an enormous amount of food and the particular energizing quality they always bring, the sense that whatever room they are in has been made more itself by their presence. Paula is one of those people who makes a house feel like a home simply by being in it, which is a gift I have always loved her for. The 5 of us spent the long Easter weekend together in a way that would have been impossible 6 months ago. Not without awareness of what had happened that was still there, would be there for a long time, perhaps always, but layered over with something new. The particular quality of people who have been through something difficult together and have come out on the other side without having broken. On Easter Sunday we had lunch at the dining table, at the proper dining table, which had been returned to its original position in early January without discussion or ceremony, simply placed back where it had always been, where the afternoon light came through the window at the angle Edward had always said was the best light in the house. I sat at my place and looked down the table at my family. Franklin cutting bread, asking Marcus something about work with genuine interest. Paula and Renata talking about something I couldn't quite hear, something that was making Paula laugh, which is the best sound in any room. Marcus looking between his wife and his brother with the expression of a man who is, at this moment, content. My table. My house. My family, complicated and imperfect and entirely mine. I thought about what it had taken to sit here like this. The months of watchfulness. The files in the closet and the locked bedroom door, and the long winter of saying nothing while knowing everything. The meeting in Gerald Watts's office and the conversation in the solicitor's waiting room, and the afternoon in Helen's office and the moment in the car when Renata had said actually sorry and I had known she meant it. I thought about Edward, who was not here but was somehow present in the bread and the roses and the angle of the light through the window. I did not feel victorious. I felt something quieter than that. Something that has no very satisfying name. The feeling of having held on to something that mattered through difficulty, without compromising either the thing or yourself. The feeling of having been exactly who you are and found that it was enough. After lunch, when Marcus and Franklin had cleared up and Paula had taken herself out to the garden, I found Renata in the sitting room. She was looking at the photograph. Not the photograph I had put on the coffee table that evening in November. That had been returned to the side table. She was looking at a different one. A framed photograph on the mantelpiece that has been there for 11 years, since the year after Edward died. It shows the whole family, Edward and me, Franklin and Paula, Marcus as a young man before Renata. We are in the garden summer, and we are all laughing at something outside the frame. It is a photograph of a moment that was perfectly ordinary and is now, because of who is no longer in it, something else entirely. Renata was looking at it with the expression I had seen in the garden in November, the one I hadn't been able to name then, which I could name now. She was looking at it with longing. Not for the house, not for the inheritance or the deed or the accounts or any of the things she had been reaching for in the autumn. Something older than any of that. The longing of someone who grew up without something and has spent a long time trying to find a substitute for the specific warmth of the thing they missed. A family that holds together. A house that means something. A table where people sit and belong to each other. I came and stood beside her. That was July, I said. 2012. Franklin had just told us Paula was pregnant. It didn't work out, the first one, but we didn't know that yet. We were just happy. Renata said nothing. Edward kept saying I'm going to be a grandfather every 5 minutes, I said. As if we might forget. Franklin told him if he said it again he'd be demoted. She almost smiled. I grew up in a house like this, I said, and then paused because that was not quite right. I didn't grow up in a house like this. I grew up in a smaller, harder house where things were often difficult. But I always knew what this kind of house was, what it felt like from the outside. And I married a man who understood that what I was building was not a house but a home. A feeling. A thing you can't see but you can feel the moment you walk through the door. Renata was looking at the photograph. That's what I was protecting, I said. Not the deed. Not the accounts. Those are just the structure. What I was protecting is the thing the structure holds. She turned and looked at me. I know, she said. I think I knew that even when I was. She stopped. I think that's why I wanted it so badly. Because I understood what it was. A pause. That doesn't excuse anything. No, I said. It doesn't. But I want you to know that I understand what it is now. Not just the legal version. She gestured at the photograph. This version. I looked at the photograph. At Edward's face mid-laugh. Caught in a moment of complete unguarded joy. Good, I said. Hold on to that. I want to tell you about a Tuesday in April, because it is the day that I think of when I think about how the story ends, or rather, how the story settles, which is not the same as ending. It was an ordinary Tuesday, the kind of day that doesn't announce itself. I had been to the market in the morning, come home, put things away. I was making lunch for myself, just me, Marcus and Renata both at work. And the house was quiet with the particular quality of a house that is comfortable with its own silence. The garden was coming properly into itself by then. The crocuses had come and gone and the roses were budding, Edward's roses, all 7 varieties, the one called Constance spry with its first tight green knot of promise. I stood at the kitchen window with my coffee and looked at the garden. And I thought, I am 68 years old and I live in my house on my terms with my family, who are complicated and imperfect in mine. I have a solicitor who knows my affairs completely. I have a financial advisor who manages my investments well. I have Gloria, who meets me for tea on Tuesdays and has for 40 years. I have Franklin, who calls on Wednesdays and comes down when it matters. I have Paula, who puts her hand over mine without being asked and drives 6 hours and asks for no credit. I have Marcus, who is learning to cook his father's recipes and to sit with his coffee in the morning and to be present in the way his father always was. I have a daughter-in-law who is still, in some ways, a person I am getting to know, who made bread from the recipe in the drawer, and asked to be shown how to do it properly, who sits in the garden without needing it to be anything other than a garden, who looks at the photograph on the mantelpiece with longing for something she is, slowly and imperfectly, beginning to find. That is not nothing. It is, in fact, a great deal. There is something I want to say about silence before I finish. Not the silence of complicity, the silence of people who look away from things they should confront, who find it easier to accept a wrong version of events than to say the true one. That silence is not what I'm talking about, and I would not celebrate it. I'm talking about the other silence, the deliberate one, the silence of someone who has decided to watch before acting, to understand before speaking, to know completely before moving. The silence that is not absence but presence, not passivity but the most active kind of attention. People mistake this silence for weakness. They see a quiet woman and they conclude that quiet means manageable, that stillness means tractable, that the absence of drama means the absence of force. They are wrong. The quietest person in the room is usually the one who is listening. Edward was right about that, as he was right about most things. The patience required to listen, really listen completely without the noise of your own response getting in the way, is not a passive skill. It is one of the most demanding things a person can do. It requires that you set aside the immediate satisfaction of speaking, of responding, of making yourself visible and audible, and trust that what you are gathering in the silence is worth more than anything you might say into it. I gathered for months in silence. And when I spoke, in the solicitor's office, in the sitting room with 5 of us around the table, in the kitchen on a Sunday morning, in the sitting room before a photograph, what I said was not improvised. It was not reactive. It was the distilled product of months of precise attention. That is not weakness dressed up as strategy. That is simply what strength looks like when it is not performing. Renata asked me once. It was May by then, the roses properly open, the garden at its fullest. She asked me how I had known. How early I had understood what was happening. We were in the garden together. She was learning to deadhead, which requires a particular willingness to cut back the blooms that are finished to make room for the ones still coming. She was not bad at it. She had good instincts for where to cut. The pantry, I said. She looked up. The first time you rearranged the pantry, I said. I knew then that there was a way you were moving through this house that wasn't visiting. You were assessing. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the rose in her hand. I think I was, she said. I don't know if I fully admitted it to myself at the time. People often don't, I said. We're very good at giving ourselves acceptable stories. What was my story? I considered this. I think your story was that you were being practical, I said. Securing your future. Being the kind of person who plans ahead and doesn't end up like. I paused. Like your mother, perhaps. She did not flinch. She had told me a little more about her mother by then, in fragments on different occasions, the way people tell difficult things when they are becoming comfortable enough to tell them at all. Her mother had died when Renata was 22, from an illness compounded by exhaustion compounded by the particular grinding toll of a life lived at the margin. She had saved, carefully, and what she had saved had been consumed by the cost of dying. Yes, Renata said. Like my mother. There's nothing wrong with wanting security, I said. There's nothing wrong with planning ahead. The method was wrong. The willingness to treat me as an obstacle rather than a person was wrong. But the underlying fear. I looked at the roses. I understand it. She was quiet. Do you forgive me? She said. She said it without looking at me, which I respected. It is easier to ask the important questions when you are looking at something else. I thought about the bedroom door. I thought about the files almost carefully replaced. I thought about the right structure in place spoken through an open window, and the letter from Gerald Watts on the kitchen table, and the Tuesday evening when I came home from the solicitor's appointment and sat at my table in my house and knew, with complete certainty, that none of this was going to go the way she had planned. I'm working on it, I said. That's honest. She nodded. It was the right answer and she knew it. That's enough, she said. We went back to the deadheading. Marcus comes into the kitchen now on Sunday mornings and makes coffee without being asked, and the 3 of us sit at the table together for an hour before the day begins. Sometimes we talk. Sometimes we read. Sometimes it is simply three people in the same kitchen in the early morning, which is its own kind of family, which is its own kind of belonging. He asked me last week what I was going to do with the house. Eventually. He asked it carefully, with the specific delicacy of a man who understands the question is charged and wants to ask it honestly anyway. That's my decision, I said. When the time comes. I know, he said. I want you to know we're not. Marcus, I said. I know. He nodded. He drank his coffee. Your father wanted to be buried from this house, I said after a while. Not from a church or a funeral home. He wanted to leave from here. And he did. I looked at my coffee cup. He said, and I thought it was a strange thing to say at the time, but I've come to understand it. He said that a house that has been fully lived in carries the living forward. That the walls hold something. The garden. The roses, Marcus said. The roses, I agreed. Whatever happens to this house, whatever I decide, whenever I decide it, it will carry that forward. It will carry all of us. I looked at him. You don't need your name on the deed for that. He was quiet for a long moment. I know, he said. Good. Renata came in then from the hallway, still in her dressing gown, and she put the kettle on without asking and got her own cup from the cupboard. The one she had chosen for herself, that lives on its own hook, that is hers in this kitchen in the entirely ordinary and uncomplicated way that things belong to people who simply live here. And she sat down at the table. The three of us sat in the Sunday morning kitchen. Outside, the May garden was extraordinary. Edward's roses were in full bloom, all 7 varieties, the one called Constance Spry with its full pink heads, the deep red climber on the back wall, the pale cream ones near the bench where Renata sits in the afternoons. The rosemary was silver green and fragrant all the way to the house. The one determined yellow crocus had finished its season and would be back next year. In a slightly different spot, still undecided about its position. I thought, we are still here. All of us. In this house. At this table. It is not perfect. It has never been perfect. Edward would have told you that. He was not a sentimental man despite the roses. He would have said that the value of a thing is not whether it is perfect but whether it is real, and whether you are willing to tend it through the seasons when it looks most bare. He would have liked this Sunday morning. The coffee and the table and the three of us quiet and present in the particular way of people who have come through something difficult and arrived at something better. He would have said very little about it, because he was not a man who required words for things that were self-evident. He would have put the bread on. My name is Constance Vera Aldridge. I am 68 years old. I live in a house I have owned for 31 years, which is paid for and properly arranged and exactly as I intend it to be. I have roses in my garden and a solicitor who knows my affairs and a friend who meets me for tea on Tuesdays and 2 sons who both, in their different ways, love me. I have a daughter-in-law who locked my bedroom door from the outside and went through my files and sent a solicitor's letter to my kitchen table, and who is learning to make bread, and to deadhead roses, and to sit in a garden without needing it to be anything other than what it is. We are still finding out what she is capable of. We are still in the long process of that. But she is here. And she is trying. And this house, which is mine, which has always been mine, which will always be mine until I decide otherwise, is holding us all. The way houses do when they have been fully lived in. The way love does when it is patient enough to be honest. The walls hold something. The garden holds something. I held something, through a long winter of silence and watchfulness, and the particular discipline of someone who knows the difference between the moment to speak and the moment to wait. And now it is spring. And the roses are open. And I am still here. Thank you for staying all the way to the end. The people who finish the whole story are the ones who understand it, and the ones who share it. If this one moved you, the next video on your screen is waiting to do the same. And if you haven't subscribed yet, come back. There's always another woman the world underestimated. And we tell those stories here.